The final 24 hours of Teresa Lewis, the case that divided America. Hi everyone. She was called the only woman on Virginia's death row, but Teresa Lewis was far more than a title. With an IQ of just 72 and a childlike understanding of the world, her case became one of the most hotly debated executions in modern American history. Supporters called her vulnerable and manipulated. Prosecutors called her the mastermind behind a chilling double homicide. As her final 24 hours began inside Fluvanna Correctional Center, the world watched. Celebrities, foreign leaders, and human rights activists pleaded for clemency, but the clock kept ticking. What unfolded in those final moments, letters to her children, whispered prayers, and a quiet final meal offers a haunting glimpse into the last day of a woman many believed should never have faced execution at all. This is the true story of Teresa Lewis's final 24 hours. A case where justice, faith, and controversy met on the same cold, steel table. Dear friends, as the early morning light crept into Fluvanna Correctional Center for Women on September 22, 2010, Teresa Wilson Lewis awoke to the silence that blankets a prison cell before dawn. This was no ordinary morning. It marked the beginning of her final day on Earth. At 41 years old, Teresa's case had sparked national outcry and international condemnation not just because of the crime, but because of her mental capacity. Diagnosed with borderline intellectual functioning and an IQ of just 72, many believed she had the cognitive development of a young adolescent. But the state of Virginia had made its decision. There would be no delay, no clemency. The execution would go forward. The controversy surrounding Teresa Lewis's sentence wasn't only about guilt, it was about intent. 8 years before, Teresa had orchestrated the deaths of her husband Julian Lewis and his 25-year-old son Sipuch in a carefully staged murder-for-hire plot. She unlocked the back door of their home, let in 2 gunmen, one of whom was her lover, and quietly waited as the shots rang out in the dark. She didn't call for help. She didn't scream. And when police arrived, she was rifling through her dead husband's wallet. She would later claim a mysterious masked man was to blame, but the evidence quickly unraveled her lies. The killers, Matthew Schallenberger and Rodney Fuller, were soon caught, and both pointed the finger directly at Teresa. They said she planned everything, drugging her family with sedatives, offering sex as payment, and promising to split a $250,000 life insurance policy. During her trial, Teresa admitted to her involvement but claimed she was manipulated by Schallenberger, who was 10 years her junior and more dominant. Prosecutors disagreed. They called her the mastermind, and a jury agreed. Teresa was sentenced to death, while the 2 gunmen received life in prison. As the years passed and her legal appeals were exhausted, public concern began to grow. Human rights groups rallied to her defense, pointing out her intellectual disabilities and suggesting she was incapable of fully understanding the consequences of her actions. Over 7,300 requests for clemency flooded the governor's office. Even the European Union and the president of Iran issued official condemnations of her sentence. But Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell remained unmoved. The evidence of her planning, he said, was clear. Teresa Lewis would be executed. Inside her cell, Teresa spent her final hours doing what she had come to rely on, most praying. She read scripture and sang hymns quietly to herself, the verses filling the stillness with something resembling peace. Those who had counseled her in prison described her as transformed, remorseful, reflective, and deeply rooted in her faith. The woman who had once conspired to kill now spent her time reading the Bible and writing letters to her children. That morning, she penned 2 final letters by hand, one to each of her children. The contents were never made public, but her attorney later described them as heartfelt messages of love, written in simple words, the kind a child might use. Her breakfast tray, bread, jelly, and milk was barely touched. Teresa had other things on her mind. At 9 o'clock in the morning, she received her last visit with her daughter, Christy Lynn. Unlike most death row visits, which are conducted through glass partitions, this one was different. Virginia granted a rare exception, allowing Teresa and her daughter to hold each other. They laughed, cried, and spoke in hushed tones, 2 women trying to squeeze a lifetime of memories into a few short hours. By early afternoon, It was time. Shackled and flanked by correctional officers, Teresa was placed into a secure van and transported 120 miles to Greensville Correctional Center, the site of Virginia's execution chamber. The trip took over 2 hours, the road winding through small towns and dark woods as a somber caravan made its way south. Upon arrival, Teresa was processed, searched, and placed in the Deathwatch cell just steps away from the execution room. There, she was served her last meal, 2 fried chicken breasts, buttered sweet peas, a cold Dr. Pepper, and both German chocolate cake and apple pie. The prison staff made both desserts perhaps a small act of kindness on a day when kindness was rare. After dinner, she was given time to shower and change into fresh prison-issued clothing, a blue denim shirt and matching pants. Her long, curly hair was brushed and tied back. She asked for her spiritual advisor and attorney, and both arrived shortly before nightfall. Reverend Lynn Litchfield, who had counseled Teresa for years, described the meeting as emotional and deeply moving. Teresa, she said, remained calm and even comforting. "Can't you see the peace?" she told them with a smile. "It's like how a little child feels, going to bed knowing Mommy and Daddy are in the next room. That's how I feel Jesus has me." Together, they sang hymns, most notably, "His Eye is on the Sparrow." Teresa's voice filled the Deathwatch cell with quiet conviction as she raised her arms toward the ceiling. Singing, "I sing because I'm happy. I sing because He set me free." It would be the last song she ever sang. At exactly 9 o'clock in the evening, the signal was given. Teresa was escorted to the execution chamber, where 14 corrections officers stood silently waiting. Witnesses, including journalists, and the daughter of one of the victims, watched from behind one-way glass. Teresa walked into the room with a visibly fearful expression, but she did not resist. As she lay on the gurney, IV lines were inserted into her arms. Her eyes darted nervously around the room. When asked if she had any final words, she turned toward the one-way glass and spoke directly to her stepdaughter. "Kathy Clifton, I just want Kathy to know that I love her, and I am very sorry," she said, her voice trembling. Kathy Clifton would later say she appreciated the apology, but still questioned whether Teresa's soul would find peace. The lethal injection began. Teresa's body shifted slightly under the straps. A correctional officer leaned in, whispering something quietly as the drugs took effect. Within 6 minutes, it was over. At 13 minutes past 9, Teresa Lewis was pronounced dead, the first woman executed in Virginia since 1912, and the 12th woman in the United States to face the death penalty since 1976. As the clock struck 13 minutes past 9, Teresa Lewis drew her final breath. What began as a cold and calculated crime ended in a moment filled with quiet, painful reflection. Her execution sparked debate far beyond Virginia, raising hard questions about justice, mercy, and whether intellectual limitations should factor into a death sentence. To some, she was a manipulative mastermind who deserved the ultimate punishment. To others, she was a vulnerable woman, failed by a system that could not or would not see the full picture. In death, Teresa Lewis became a symbol of reform to some, of justice to others. But behind the headlines, the petitions, and the protests was a deeply flawed human being who made choices that can never be undone. Did Virginia execute a cold-hearted killer or a woman who barely understood the gravity of her actions? The truth may never be simple, but what remains is this: 2 lives were lost in that house and 1 more in the chamber.